everyone, welcome to another session of A Day in the Life of a BA. My name's James and I'm the president of IIBA Ireland and I'll be your host today. At IIBA Ireland, our mission is to support professionals by sharing knowledge, common terminology and practical insights into the work that us business analysts do across different industries, across different sectors, across different tools, techniques, teams, topics, whatever it is, that's what this series is about. And that's what this series is a chance to give you a chance to hear directly from other BA professionals about like their typical day, like the processes they use, the tools and techniques they use, the challenges and successes that they've encountered, or anything else into the insights. And each month we're inviting a different BA professional to share their personal journey, highlighting the approaches they take, technologies they rely on, and real world examples from their own work. So whether you're considering a career in business analysis, already working alongside another business analyst, or simply looking to deepen your understanding of the role, today's session is designed to give you that clarity, the confidence, and a shared language for working effectively with business analysts. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Bob, who works as a BA in the Enterprise Resource Planning, or ERP space. Bob will be walking us through his own day in the life, sharing insights through and practical insights from his own experience. Throughout the session, please feel free to turn on your camera if you like for interactions, and you can interact with other people in the chat function. And if you want to submit any questions, you can put them in either into the chat or the Q&A tab. We'll go through them at the end of the presentation. And so without further ado, Bob, it's over to you.
Great. It looks like you've got a couple of more folks waiting to get in, but
I have no I'll admit them now. Yeah.
Thank you all for joining us today. I know that it's a little bit later in the day where you are. It's my lunch hour, so I call this a lunch and learn. But in this case, I guess this is an after workday delight. So my name is Bob Starinsky. I've been working in the ERP space for probably 40 plus years now. I guess it's been close to that. 1990, so it's closing in on 40 years. But when I first got involved with ERP, I didn't know what ERP was, so I learned, and I learned by being a business analyst. And that's one of the things I want to emphasize today is sometimes, it was almost an accidental career, if you will. But I was a career switcher. I was working in banking at the time, and I basically was in a middle management role in banking. And our bank was in the middle of downsizing, doing some restructuring. And I had the privilege, and I say that tongue in cheek, of writing a recommendations for downsizing of my department, which included my own position. And it's okay. I didn't mind because it started a whole new career for me, if you will, and that's how I got involved with the ERP side of business analysis. But previously, I had worked in the system side of banking for a long time. And one of the things that at the end of the day, when it was time to move on, I concluded that basically all I did in banking, all banking does is push people's money around on computers. And so that's how I became a little bit more involved with computers. And I went to work in a manufacturing company, and I was a financial systems analyst for that particular firm. And within 6 months of joining that firm, I became part of a project to implement an ERP system for portions of the business. And so I got to learn what ERP was all about. And I got to learn a whole bunch of other things in that role. I learned all about AS400 computers. I learned all about RPG and SQL. things that I hadn't learned previously, but I was young and I was full of energy, and I was a sponge. And so that's how I got involved with ERPs. So just as a little bit of a background. Um, so what's an ERP business analyst? I think that's very important as a starting point, that an ERP business analyst is really a business analyst that has a specialty, ERP software. And ERP software is a special animal. And so before I get too far along, I want to address what is an ERP system? Well, it's a pre-programmed business management software system. It automates and integrates key business processes, finance, HR, purchasing, sales, distribution, and manufacturing into a single system. Um, it's years ago when I was in banking, we we wanted to do the same thing. We didn't call it ERP in banking, but at least when I left banking in 1990, we hadn't quite got there yet. There were some big systems out there, but they weren't completely integrated like what we were looking for. And so it's kind of interesting that even in my banking days, we were using different packages of software. And that's one of the things that ERP that tries to replace is the fact that you have all of these different packages of software, and that you have to have back in those days, we had batch feeds between systems. So we would have a general ledger system. We might have a purchasing system. We might have an inventory system. We might have a plant maintenance system. We might have a sales order system. And so we had all of these various systems. I mentioned very specifically, or I omitted manufacturing, because in those days, our manufacturing system was a room filled with whiteboards. And on each of the whiteboards was one of our machines in one of our plants. So our plants were represented basically by whiteboards, and we were booking. We would take orders, put them on literally a post-it note, and place them on the machine that was going to run them. So very sophisticated manufacturing system, and that was 1990. Obviously, we use spreadsheets as well, but that way, if you wanted that digital dashboard, so to speak, you had to look up at the whiteboard and see what was going on in the plants. Interesting. And so that's what ERP tends to do, is to replace all of that melting pot of applications that we had, a typical company has. So we were trying to get away from that. So the value proposition for ERP is pretty simple. It allows organizations to create a unified and transparent view of operations through a single source of the truth, and everybody throws that around for their business data. And it collects, stores, manages, and interprets data from multiple business activities across multiple departments and really across multiple locations. And ERP systems can do this on a worldwide basis in different languages, in different time zones. And so we have a pretty large solution that we're trying to build with these systems. So the largest companies in the world, BP, Shell Oil, these are the types of companies that are certainly candidates for ERP. Smaller businesses, not so much. They do mid-sized manufacturing companies, especially multi-plant or manufacturing type companies. They, in turn, will be using ERP a little bit more predominantly. So doesn't all this sound great for the business? You betcha it does. But there are a lot of gotchas, and we want to spend some time talking about those today, because that's where your role as a business analyst is going to come in terms of the ERP marketplace. First of all, ERP systems are relatively expensive systems, and they're only available from a core group of major vendors. So Oracle, SAP are certainly two of the biggest names in the business. They are large, complex, and highly integrated systems. Uh, Difficult to implement, difficult to maintain. ERP systems are meant to automate many aspects of the business, if not all aspects. If you talk to the vendor, if you're not doing it in their system, then you shouldn't be doing it. We have a local spirits shop. Uh, they Their name is Binny's, and their kind of their slogan is, um, "If Binny's doesn't have it, it's not worth drinking." And that's kind of a good analogy for ERP software. If our software doesn't do it, it's not worth doing, or it's probably something you don't want to do. I know it's maybe not the best way of looking at it, but and some of these vendors are pretty cavalier about it. So ERP systems, I like to consider ERP systems as the IKEA version of software, ready to assemble. So all the pieces are there, um, but the software that you get out of the box or off the CD, it's not pre-configured and it's not immediately usable. So that's a pretty important side of it. Is that how do we make it usable? Well, there are scores of business-driven choices that have to be made to make the software usable for any given business environment. And really guiding that decision-making process is a central role for the business analyst in any ERP project. So that's where your first role comes in, or biggest role is going to be in configuring this software for use within the business. And there's a lot more involved to it, and we'll spend a little bit of time on it. When you buy ERP software, the software is already coded for you. Um, it's not a situation where you need to pick and choose. Oh, okay, we need to have a screen for data entry here. No, those screens are already built for you. It's a matter of choices that sit behind that screen. And we'll spend a few minutes about that. Um, and understand that when you buy this software, it's going to have been built according to a vendor standards. In some cases, they use their own proprietary programming language. Uh, so it's not basically your standards. And it's also going to be written in the vendor's native tongue or language. So SAP, it's a German-based company. And so when I learned when I was implementing SAP, I had to have basically an English to German dictionary handy because I had to translate some of the information in a screen or in the database so that I could understand mostly what a field was. So if there was what I had to understand, what data am I going to be sticking in this field? Sometimes you can tell right from the screen, and you can read where you need to put things in terms of mapping from one system to another, but not always quite as obvious, especially if those are behind the screen or behind the scenes, I should say. The software that you buy from an ERP vendor can be very difficult to change. In fact, if you make any changes, you need to make them in a very prescribed way that are dictated by the vendor if you make any changes at all. And the vendors typically don't want you changing the software. And really, it's for good reason you don't want to change their software because you want to be able to upgrade this software as new releases are made available. So it's not quite as bad as what you would experience with Microsoft, Patch Tuesdays, or with the nightly or the I don't know, almost nightly downloads for Apple devices of updates. Uh, so ERP isn't quite like that. Usually it's a little bit different in terms of the frequency of rollout of releases. So the ERP business analyst is going to play a key role in leveling the expectations of what changes can be made to the software. You basically are leveling the expectations of your stakeholders to make sure that, again, that they're not telling you to do things that you shouldn't or that you can't. And so it's very important. The business analyst has a very important front end role in terms of software selection and being involved in that process. And we'll spend some time on that. ERP software, yeah, it does seem unnecessarily complex. And there's some good reasons for that. It's a necessary evil of trying to be all things to all businesses in different parts of the world and in different languages. And so there's just a lot of behind the scenes tables that exist that drive, what language is printed on the screen, for instance, or how currency is represented. So these are all things that are happening in terms of the software. Currency conversions are going to be happening in some cases. So all of this, very, very important. Once implemented, any given ERP system or version of a system even can be difficult to move away from. We call that in the business vendor lock-in. We want to get you into, tongue in cheek, an ERP vendor it wants to get you into their software, and then once you're in, you can't get out, and that can be a real problem. Even moving to a new version of the same software can be especially challenging. And if your organization has authorized extensive changes, external workarounds, or interfaces to other systems outside of the ERP, you can be in for a time-consuming, expensive, and lengthy upgrade process. I thought since we're on a call to Europe, I thought the best example that I could come up with for what happens inside of an ERP system was a metro map, a tube map from London that shows basically SAP Business One, which is their mid-market ERP system from SAP. So the SAP Business One system and what it does as represented by a tube map. So it's kind of an interesting choice of showing how that works. But you can see that we string together lots of different modules. And there are a lot of codependencies in ERP systems as well. And so, again, every part of the ERP system, for instance, is going to use the general ledger. Almost every transaction that you create in terms of the ERP system is probably going to have an associated financial transaction. And so there's a lot of give and take between the modules inside the system. And that's a perfect example. So again, every system is going to have multiple layers of complexity that you have to deal with as a business analyst. One thing I want to clear up right away is ERP projects are not agile projects. It's really, so if you're coming from an agile software development environment, I've got news for you. You might want to brush up on waterfall, because waterfall is the methodology that fits ERP projects best. And a couple of reasons why. First of all, this software already exists. You're not building something from scratch. Second of all, these projects are not development projects in any sense of the word. They are what we would consider a configuration and integration project. And so, yes, there might be some software development in terms of building interfaces or mapping, developing mapping programs to move fields from one software into the other. But a lot of that's already done for you. You can get ETL, extract, translate, and load software that can build a database for you that you can then put into the ERP. The ERP vendors often will have their own conversion programs for you. So you still have to load the data into a file structure that supports that loading program. But that's where, so you're not touching the ERP directly. You are putting it into a database, and that database is then used with the extract, translate, and load software that the vendor provides to introduce your master data, for instance, into the ERP system. So there's a firewall that's basically built in front of the ERP system, and it's for your own good. It's so that you don't mess up the database, because once you mess up the ERP database, it just might not work. It's a can be a pretty challenging operation. You can have what sounds like a master data file, and but behind the master data file, there might be dozens of other files that relate to that master data file. So the main data might be in the one file, but there are logical files that are built, dozens of them perhaps, over that master data file. And so again, those types of relationships are done through the database management system, and you don't want your extract, translate, and load process to break it. So pretty important. I have seen it done. I have seen it broken, and that's not a good place to be. ERP setup follows a very specific, a very linear, step-by-step path in order to realize value from the system. So what you're really doing is mapping your existing business processes and business data into pre-existing software. And you do this by configuring a seemingly endless array of tables, hundreds, if not thousands of tables that sit behind the scenes and define how the various programs inside the ERP system work. And it can be a challenging process. I've actually, years ago, I did some development work, dating myself here. But and when I did development work, one of the things that we were doing was building software that multiple businesses could in turn use. It was an application development tool. It was basically a way it was a program that created basically databases or database front ends and menu structures that could then be used for in a general fashion to build applications. And so a lot of it was kind of interesting, because when I first became part of the ERP scene, some of the information, some of the knowledge that I had, and again, I go back to programming in COBOL and BASIC and RPG. So I'm a really old dog with fleas. But it was kind of interesting because the techniques that we were doing in terms of building programmable software that could be used in multiple environments, that's exactly what they were doing with an ERP system. And so when I went to some of the technical classes on the ERP system that we were implementing, it was to me, it was just fascinating. I mean, I felt like a kid in a candy shop because I was seeing that some of the things that I had learned, some of the things that I had done in building programmable software, these guys were doing it on a obviously a higher level than what we did, because they had to do it for multi-currencies, for multiple locations, and for multiple languages, and I didn't have to contend with that. So I was in the junior leagues, if you will, in terms of building a programmable system. So these are when you build programmable systems, they're a whole level of magnitude different than the software that we might build to solve a specific problem within our business organization. So the ERP analyst plays basically a beginning, ending and middle role in terms of the ERP software. And so we're basically, I like to look at it as professionals that bridge business needs and ERP systems. When I got involved with manufacturing and I came from the banking industry, I didn't know anything about ERP. I didn't know anything about manufacturing. But they said, "Boy, you've got all this knowledge of computers and banking, and we want you to bring it over and leverage it for us." And I did that, and I did it fairly well. At least I thought I did at the time, and it was fun. It was challenging, and learning a whole different way. And again, you have to understand that my background. By training, I'm an accountant. I have a master's degree in accounting. I also have a master's of business administration and finance. So, I'm a numbers guy. Okay. Yeah, I live in Excel, so to speak. To this day, I still live in Excel. Um, so, what we do is we bridge the business to the software, and really, um, most of the folks that I worked with in terms of these ERP teams um, had come out of the business, not out of IT. Um, the people that worked in IT took over or took charge of the technical side of ERP, installing the system on our servers, um, security on the systems, um, perhaps doing the data migrations from the old systems into the ERP, but really the day-to-day nuts and bolts of working with the stakeholders, the business users, and getting the program set up and operational, training the users. All of that is what we did as business analysts first, and learning the software, and then being able to translate um, that software into our business needs, and vice versa, being able to translate the business itself into the ERP system. So it's finding that happy marriage between ERP and the business itself, the business processes. So we're also that link between stakeholders and the technical teams, just like we would be in any role where we would be working with users to define software requirements, translating those requirements into system requirements, and then working with the technical team to code those and test those and make them ready for the business. So that's the role that we still play in terms of ERP business analyst. We ensure that the ERP system is going to support the core business functions, and that it's going to, in the end, provide measurable business value and the operational efficiencies that our businesses are looking for. So pretty important. Um, our role is going to be to thoroughly understand the current business practices within organizations and processes, and also along with understanding uh, what any desired process improvements, um, industry best practices that we want to adopt, and certainly what types of uh, improvements and value add that we're looking for. So we need to be able to take all of that information and build that into a knowledge base to help us select the right software for our organizations. And so here's where, in the pre-selection process, where the business analyst has a really important role. And we're basically going to work alongside vendor, what is often called a pre-sales consultant. And we are going to basically gather typical business transactions, because the best way to see if an ERP is going to fit your needs is to demonstrate your transactions, your data in use on the system that you're thinking of selecting. So you build those into transaction scenarios. You may also know them as user stories or scripts that can be subsequently performed on a test case basis in any given ERP software. And what we're looking for is demonstrable and predictable outcomes. And so when we're scoring system. That's what we're looking to do. We're looking to does this system fully support, and we're trying to come to a goodness of fit. And I mean, I'll spend a couple of minutes on that too. Um, One of the most important concepts that I learned years ago was called the USA principle. And I learned it in terms of process improvement, and first in banking and later in manufacturing. Um, and the USA principle is the brainchild of Carl Kapp. And uh, now we all know that we have to understand. We have to develop process knowledge before we can make changes. We have to know what it is the process does, and we then need to look at ways that we can simplify it. So the first part of this principle, the USA principle, is understanding. Understand any process before you can improve it. Once you've understood it, then you can go about the process of simplifying it. Um, and standardizing it. And you can come up with a whole bunch of S words, simplification, standardizing, streamlining. They all tend to work here. Obviously, we also want to strip away parts of processes that aren't necessary. We want to look at ways that we can remove bureaucracy from the process as well. And then finally, after we've got this simplification effort done, only then can a process be successfully automated. And really, we should only be automating what can and should be automated. And when you think about what's happening with AI nowadays, that speaks a world of power there of what should be automated. Because not everything is a candidate for automation, and not everything should be automated. Some things we don't really need AI to drive business transactions and drive them incorrectly. And so it becomes important to understand how this might actually work in total in the process. So as we lead stakeholders through the software selection process, we're going to find that it can be a pretty challenging task. It's almost like herding cats. They're all going in different directions. Some stakeholders have pre-selected a given software system or tech stack based upon their prior work experiences. Some stakeholders will dwell on bells and whistles, not really, that looks great. I love the color of that. It's more than about looking great and the color. It's really about the functionality. And so you really have to level expectations, harness people in, get them to focus on the functionality they need to do their business. So having the right people, having level-headed people on your selection team is pretty important. And you don't always get a say in who's on the selection team, but it does whatever you can do to learn. Again, it's all about learning who these stakeholders are, what their agendas. They all come in with a certain background, and they also come in some cases with their own agendas. And so you need to understand where they're coming from and what their agenda may be. I've been in situations where the software's been pre-selected. And this happens a lot in this business. If you follow Eric Kimberling, who's a well-known, he's the CEO of Third Stage Consulting. They're an they're ERP agnostic consulting company. And one of the things that Eric talks about is the fact that oftentimes that a system integrator or maybe somebody like an accounting house will come in and help you select your software. What they don't tell you is, well, we're an SAP business partner. So whatever we tell you are going to be things that are going to help you or steer you toward selecting a SAP as the business system of choice for your business. It's not always the best case. It's kind of interesting. I've seen situations where companies were on one path of going to try to really do it the right way and look at all the various software packages and evaluate them. And then all of a sudden, the company uh, brings in a new CEO, and the new CEO is friends of an IBM salesman. And IBM in that day, in that time and day, um, also had a ISSA. It was basically a subsidiary that did SAP implementation. And so the entire software selection process that was underway was uprooted, and there was no, there's no question what it was going to be. It was going to be SAP. And so um, it was a matter of, well, you can select any software you want as long as SAP is the outcome. It's not really a choice. It's not really a selection process. Why waste your time and effort going through it? And so in that particular case, you're not going to argue with the CEO, even if, even if this particular software isn't. It's not that SAP is a bad software package. It's just that maybe something would have been cheaper and better and faster, but it didn't matter because it was literally pre-selected for the organization. So you will find that there's a lot of politics, and that's what I'm getting at here. Is there are a lot of politics involved in ERP software selection. Part of it is these are big ticket systems, and there. Hopefully, we don't find too many cases of this, but there is always that possibility that somebody in the mahogany row is a neighbor, friends with somebody. Hopefully, there's not kickbacks involved, but you never know. And so there can be all kinds of complicating circumstances that can preclude the best software being selected. Just fair warning. So it's very important to try to be as objective as possible in the software selection process. Um, I believe that when I've worked with clients independently, again, we do it from a standpoint of being very objective. I've worked with a company called Soft Select, and they have a database of ERP systems available that you basically rent or use in terms of your software selection process. It has a lot of the software feature and functionality already scored for you so that you can make an intelligent selection and try to sometimes not have to reinvent the wheel in terms of looking at all the features and functionality that the software has. So some holy grail answers. Does the system perform our transaction workflow in a logical and straightforward and automated manner? Will this software scale with our business as it grows? And can we easily adapt this software to changes in our business model? And this one does happen. Companies change their business models more and more nowadays. And so I worked with a pretty small company I worked with. They previously imported inventory from China, and then COVID happened, and they were no longer able to get product reliably from China. And so it really disrupted their business model. And so they adopted a new business model. And their new business model said, well, we won't take inventory into our own warehouse anymore. We will rely on another organization that's much larger than us, and they will in turn buy product that we will resell to our customer base, and we won't even take physical possession of the inventory. We'll have it direct shipped from their warehouses. And so, unfortunately, their system didn't really handle that too well. So that can certainly be a problem. So again, it's small, minor change to a business model. How's the software going to handle that? You need to be aware of it. So here is sometimes a picture is worth 1,000 words, and being business analyst, you're probably fully aware of that with process models. But here is an example of the pre-selection process or steps that we go through. You need a feasibility team. You prepare a strategic assessment. You understand your current process uh, models and the gaps in those processes. Um, you also are going to work with your users to understand what processes can be improved. Oftentimes, they can be improved before you put them in an ERP system, obviously. And then, what from our current processes could we automate? So again, you want to walk away with those kinds of recommendations, and ultimately, you're developing software selection criteria, and you're developing a business case for making a change. You're going to be able to make a business case on improvements to your processes, automation of more parts of your process, and obviously the integration that ERP can bring to the table. I am obviously box, the most important box on this screen is that we are ready for software selection. And then we move on to the next step. But, obviously, this oversimplifies the whole process. And you, as the BA, are involved in all of this. You're putting all of this together, just very similarly to how you would work with users to develop business requirements for a new piece of software. You're doing the same thing here, in effect, but you're not going to build the software from scratch. You're going to go out and shop on the open market for software that already has that functionality built into it. And so there's a little bit different conceptually, but it gets to the same place in the end. Your software selection process, so you may have a feasibility team. You might be part of that feasibility team. And there's a select group of users that are involved with that you're working with, the stakeholders. And then now it's the selection team. And the selection team may have some of those same people on it, but you may have more of your software folks there too, to make sure that whatever software you select is going to be compatible with the environment that you want to operate in. More and more today, we see ERP operating as cloud-based software as opposed to on-premises software. So those are things we need to understand and how that's all going to work out. So if you're moving from on-premise to the cloud, what's all that going to be about? So again, these are things that need to be understood as well. And so you may need certainly some technical background in terms of the analysts that are working with you on a project. You are going to develop a project budget, and you're going to develop a scope for the project. You're going to prepare demonstration scripts that I mentioned earlier. You're going to develop extensive function and features checklists. And you're going to evaluate and score candidate software by seeing demonstrations of software, by really becoming a sponge for as much information about that software as you can. And that's what's ultimately going to go into the selection and scoring of the software. And so, again, pretty important where we're headed with that. Why do we buy ERP systems, or when should we buy ERP? When our systems are fairly standard. when our business uses commonly accepted business practices, when our needs are very urgent. I worked with a company and had to put ERP in because they had been sold. So their business had been sold to somebody else. They were going to be spun off as a separate company and sold. And so the software, uh, the software license they had uh, would no longer apply. They were using, for instance, they were using JD Edwards software, and they were being spun off. And the new organization did not use JD Edwards; they used something different, and so they opted not to implement um, the new company's software. They in turn uh, bought something else and put it in. So again, they weren't going to need all the bells and whistles that either what the new company was using or what they were using. And the way they were going to do it is, they were a wholly owned subsidiary. The parent company was just going to consolidate the financials. Um, that's the kind of business they were in. They bought and sold companies all day long as a good way of looking at it. They were a holding company. Um, ERP fits in. It's ready built, off the shelf software. But again, it's not ready to go out of the box, as I already mentioned. These systems have to be configured to your business. And this is where the role of the ERP business analyst is really going to shine, because you're going to learn how to configure that software. You've already had a little bit of taste of it during the pre-selection process, because you had to set up transactions in terms of working with the ERP vendor to set up your transactions so you could do a product demo. Well, here's my little analogy. I call it the ERP jet plane methodology. So, it's kind of like the song "Leaving on a Jet Plane." Don't know where I'm going or when I'll be back. Well, that's what we got here. The what the business stakeholders see, that sleek, sexy, smooth flying new ERP system. Well, behind the scenes, on the right hand side, this is what you and I see as business analysts. The array of switches. I picked the worst possible control panel there. That's a Lockheed Constellation control panel or a 707. So these were very early on now. With a lot of the fly-by-wire technology, we don't have quite as many buttons and toggle switches and dials to worry about. But again, the behind-the-scenes flight deck of the ERP system, it's a myriad of controls and settings that you have to manipulate to get that software operating smoothly for the business users. And again, back to the whole idea of the waterfall, um, we go through, and this is a pretty typical process. We establish a charter for a team that will go through the process, configuring and training, and getting the end users ready to operate the system. So once we've established that, we need to develop 2B models. And again, 2B business models are leveraging our as is business models. But we're now going to overlay it with the software that we're implementing. I have a whole process that I used for doing that in consulting, because one of the things that we did in consulting is we we had a product offering, a service offering, if you will, that we would help you implement a new ERP system. And this goes back to around Y2K. We would help you implement a brand new ERP system within 90 days. So our goal was to get in, uh, learn your business, uh, get the software in place, and get out in 90 days. We want, we obviously we wanted to get out of there before customers are tired of writing checks to us. Um, Consulting is a pretty expensive way to go. But what you're doing with consultants in terms of implementing ERP is you're leveraging them. You don't have to expend as much team effort. You don't have to do the deep dive learning necessarily because you're relying on consultants for a lot of that work. Um, and that's um, it's a way of getting an ERP system implemented rather quickly. Um, from the 2B models, we configure the software. Uh, we also establish data standards. One of the most important things I can tell you about ERP, and really with any system, it's not just ERP, but the data. There's two things you got to get right with ERP. One is the configuration, and the other is the data. So your data has to be absolutely clean. You've got to have good, solid standards for your data, and the data has to be clean in order to put it inside the ERP system. Once you've got your software configured, your data standards in, you want to prototype some of your processes again, so that what you're seeing now in the back end looks something close to what you did in terms of the software demo 2 months, 3 months, 6 months, 12 months ago in terms of the selection process. You will probably still find some gaps. And from those gaps, you're going to have to identify workarounds and technical solutions. And ultimately, you're going to be doing data mapping as a result of the 2B process and the data standards you're making so that you can migrate that data over into the new system. And so this is how we get to a state of production readiness, as I like to call it. ERP systems are not a glove fit. Understand that up front. This software, if anything, it's like a Swiss Army knife. All kinds of different modules. It does this, it does that, it does this, and does that. The only problem is these tools on a Swiss Army knife, they're just not the same. They're just not as robust. And so oftentimes the tool that's inside the ERP system may not work for your business. You may be doing something that's already better than what ERP offers. So these systems are not one size fits all. And so, you know, you're trying to get as close as possible to 100% of your business needs being met. Not always possible. But again, we want to get as close to 100% as we can. If the software you're looking at, if you're 80% or below, you're probably looking at the wrong system. Um, that's pretty much what I can say. Some business models simply can't be fully supported by available ERP software, perhaps any software in the ERP arena. And understand why that happens is most ERP systems are geared toward physical product manufacturing or distribution, and they are not necessarily geared toward supporting service or financial product type businesses. So, ERP doesn't fit very well in a bank because we don't manufacture money in banking. Insurance companies, same type of thing. Now, the ERP system financial side of the business, maybe the purchasing side of it, maybe those things will work really well in those environments. The asset management side might work really well, but manufacturing planning, no. Same thing could probably be said for airlines. The ERP system would not really support that business model very well. And then you said to yourself, well, why don't they tailor ERP? Well, the reason why is because of the particular business need and because of the market, the size of the market for manufacturing and distribution businesses is much greater than the market for airlines or the market for banks or insurance companies. And they're also highly regulated businesses. Now, not to say that manufacturing doesn't have some regulations. You most certainly, if you're in food manufacturing, for instance, you need to make sure that you have lot tracing available. We have it probably doesn't affect uh, the folks in Ireland right now, but we have a pretty extensive case of food poisoning going on, and they believe it to be lettuce, and that was in Taco Bell uh, eating establishments. And so there's an outbreak of what they some type of a um, virus that causes explosive diarrhea, something that none of us want to get, I'm sure. And so they are in the midst of doing a massive product recall, and to be able to come up with the lots and the manufacturing dates and the traceability of where it was sent. So ERP systems have to have a lot, especially in the food processing industry, have to have a lot of this lot traceability capability built into them, so that as you're manufacturing, as you're shipping a product, that you know where it's going, you know where it was sourced from, and you know where it was going out the other end. So very, very important. Your due diligence during the software selection process has to sort out essential versus must-have versus show-stopper requirements, from what would be nice to have or non-essential features and functions. Um, a very good litmus test is, can we comfortably perform our business the way this software wants us to perform our business? Um, Basically, what I'm saying here is, when you buy an ERP system, you get a way of doing business right outside of the box. You're buying their way of doing business. And so you need to make sure that their philosophy, their way of doing business, is something that you can be comfortable with. So vendors, the systems aren't a glove fit, as I mentioned. And every vendor will claim to implement best practices. Well, they implement best practices, but it's in their own unique ways. And that may not be the way your business, your organization wants to do business, or how it does business today, or conceivably would have to do business in the future. So again, things that you need to be very careful, very cognizant of. And that's why those product demonstrations, and you literally want a demonstration of start to finish. How does our product or service, how does our business fit into the CRP, and how does things get made and shipped all the way to the customer? And how does it get billed? And how does it get paid from the customer? Now, you may not be able to replicate 100% of it, but you need to try to get as close as you can to understanding fully how that ERP system is going to work inside of your business. And so you, as an analyst, are going to play a critical role in identifying software gaps and in orchestrating what the technical solutions are going to be, and the workarounds that you're going to use to close those gaps. So very, very important. Um, Customizing ERP software to support unique business flows. Yep, you can do it, not advised, because your customizations won't be supported by the ERP vendor, um, especially as it evolves through vendor updates and new releases. So when you are going to do customizing, you really need to do it externally and introduce those transactions into the ERP through vendor supported programs, APIs. EDI transactions are a perfect example of how you might need to get your transactions into the ERP system. So the business analyst is going to play a critical role in specifications for these technical solutions. And obviously, you're going to be a critical person when it comes to ensuring these technical solutions work, and ultimately being able to train and turn over these technical solutions to your user community. Um, I think that slide just repeated. Yeah, okay, I'll ignore that. ERP go live steps. So again, back to that process that we're seeing step by step as we're walking through the ERP software. Now we've got the software pretty much configured and ready to go. So we'll train our end users. We'll go through some acceptance testing with them. We'll do a final migration of data. We'll validate balances. So as an accountant, this is something that I do a lot in terms of ERP is we will transfer the balance sheet balances into the general ledger of the new system. We will also translate the open accounts receivable balances into the new system. And we also open and obviously we transfer over the detailed transactions that make up those open balances. And so that if a customer inquires, that we can drill down, oh, you owe, you owe $100,000, and here's the transactions that make up that. So again, we need to be able to have visibility of that in a new system. If we don't transfer over the open transactions, the problem we run into is then how do we close them out? So that's why we need to make sure we do that. And again, I'm a financial guy, and so those are things that we look at very carefully when we're making a transition over new systems. Ultimately, once we've got the balances validated, we've got our testing done, our migration done, we go live and we start running our new processes, and we've got to stabilize those processes on the new system. And a lot of the ways that we do that as a business analyst, it's by hand holding the end users. I think the most critical time in the go live of any new ERP system is the first 48 hours. And really, the reason I say the first 48 hours is because nowadays so many businesses are running 24/7. It used to be we'd run an 8-hour day, and so most of our users would be up to speed in a single day. But in terms of a manufacturing environment where we have a plant that's running 24/7, we've got to make sure that we're supporting all the plant folks on a go live basis throughout the whole workday, which is 24 hours in a lot of cases. Obviously, as we're stabilizing processes, we might find some errors. Some of them might be miscommunication about how to do something, missteps in terms of procedure flow. Again, all part of go live support. We need to make sure that we are the subject matter experts, and that we have super users as well that are subject matter experts that can help people, and so that we can get people up to speed as quickly as we can. So those first 48 hours are going to be critical. Those are going to be the times when we're trying to get all the end users up to speed, solve all the problems that they have, so that they know how to do their transactions, at least the basics of the transactions, without a lot of hand holding. Ultimately, this is a process that can go on for a period of time. And once we've got that system stable, then we're also going to be coming back periodically, and we're going to be doing health checks. Is the system running? Are we using the system as it was intended? Is somebody still doing all their planning offline on a spreadsheet? Why? Why aren't they using the ERP system for it? That type of thing. So we need to make sure that we get as much utilization of the system as possible. And then we look at upgrades, new releases to the software, fixes to the software. All of these need to be incorporated in. Another part, and I've got the box on the left hand highlighted in blue very specifically to highlight the importance of integration of custom and third-party solutions. And something as simple as a label printer or barcode readers or scanners, very, very important. All of these things are needed, especially in a manufacturing environment. Barcode printers, scanners, very, very important in manufacturing and distribution. we've got to make sure all of those pieces fit, all those pieces are working, and that people know how to use them in terms of the hardware as well as the software that we're basically poking data into. So again, very, very important that we have a complete coverage during the go live process and the stabilizing of it and ultimately the day-to-day operation of it. So again, I mentioned earlier about good data. If one half the ERP equation is the right configuration, the other half is good data. So mapping your business into the ERP system is very, very important. And you as a business analyst are going to be a critical role in establishing both data standards and mapping current systems into the ERP system. So very, very important effort. We in the manufacturing company I worked at, we had in the neighborhood of 80,000 SKUs or part numbers that needed to be transferred into the new system. Well, what we also figured out is that we didn't really have a good part numbering scheme or classification scheme for our products. So we spent the better part of 6 months coming up with a complete way of classifying all of our products, standardizing all of our part numbers, and even standardizing how our descriptions were put in the system. So things like that can be an enormous amount of effort that the BA will play a role in and have literally nothing at all to do with the new software other than making use of the new software with your existing data in the most efficient, in the most productive manner possible. So mapping your data, it's going to be a significant effort for most companies. So you will need a thorough understanding of your new ERP system that you're going to populate with your data. I don't know of many situations, I haven't run into many situations where the existing business data didn't need to be standardized, scrubbed, and formatted. And, there's a couple of different ways of doing it. The most frequent way that I've done it is we've done it with Excel. And so we do a lot of manipulation of the existing master data in terms of using Excel to do this standardization, scrubbing, and formatting process. And from there, we introduce it into the ERP system through the master data migration programs that they have. So all vendors have technical tools that can help you introduce your master data and your transaction data into the ERP system. They do this for a reason because they want to sell ERP systems, and they know if they can make the process of getting your data into the system easier, it'll be an easier sell for them for the system. So again, take advantage of those tools. You have to learn how to use those tools, and they do work. They do require validation. They're not always very fast. So it can be a very lengthy process to get all the data migrated over. So again, I highly recommend that you use the vendor tools. Don't assume that you can load data outside the vendor prescribed tools and methods. That can be an accident waiting to happen. I know of one instance where they did a conversion of a data file directly into the physical file of another database, and it just completely trashed their purchasing process because they didn't get all of the data they needed on the vendor records transferred over because there were logical views that they hadn't taken into account. So very, very important to use the tools that are available to you. Some key insights that you need to worry about. It's really about the operation of the business and the functional nuances of the ERP system. So again, the more you know about the business you're working in, and the more you know about the ERP system that you're dealing with, obviously, the easier it's going to be for your role. Um, as I mentioned very early on, many of the ERP business analysts that I've worked with have come from the business first. They didn't come out of the technical side. And so they didn't know about writing software requirements and they didn't know about building process models, literally. And so these are things that, they knew purchasing or they knew, how to set up a product, how to configure a product in terms of selling the product to a customer. But they didn't know a lot of the details about how their business processes worked or how to model those processes. So you'll find that you'll have people coming onto the team with varying degrees of training, and that so literally, I think very important if you are a manager of business analyst, that you develop a matrix of skills that your business analysts have, so that you can say, okay, this person knows how to do process modeling in Visio, or this person knows how to do data cleansing using Excel. So, what skills do they bring to the table? Because you may need to pair up. And for instance, I was paired up with an end user that was a material manager from one of our manufacturing plants. He didn't really know about systems. He just used the system every day to manage his purchasing and procurement functions and to manage his stockroom. And so it was a completely different role that he had. He had a business first role, and I was in the systems department, and I was supporting financial systems and basically the purchasing side of the house as well in terms of their systems support. So we were able to play off of one another's skills, and so you develop that type of relationship where you're complementing one another in your skill sets. So ERP business analyst, we operate really at the intersection of business operations and IT. So if you're currently involved in IT exclusively, expect to learn more about the business. If you're currently mostly involved in the business side of the business, now you're going to learn a little bit more about the technical side of it, but not quite as much as you think, because you're going to learn about the technical side of it from the operation of the ERP system perspective, and not necessarily from building programs and coding and the operation of the system behind the scenes. Some typical responsibilities. There's not a lot of difference between what you do as a business analyst and what you do as an ERP business analyst. You gather requirements. You analyze the business. You basically translate what the business needs are into what the specifications are going to be for the ERP system. You're going to map current and future business processes, mapping business data, configuring the ERP modules, identifying areas for customization, and areas how you can optimize workflows in ERP. So again, a lot of the same things you're already doing. Planning and scheduling the ERP implementation, the various tasks that are on there. And again, I say a lot of it is not going to be an agile type of basis, but more of a waterfall approach, that there's a logical sequence to get everything up and running for an ERP system. Communicating progress to stakeholders, and basically ensuring your successful deployment. One of the ways that we did it is we did pre-training. So we talked about, because ERP and ERP kind of grew up through something called manufacturing resource planning, which is basically using the computer to plan your manufacturing, your production processes. And so in our business, we had never done that before. We were, again, we had this huge room with whiteboards and post-it notes. That was basically how we ran our manufacturing operation. And so now we were going to take all of that paper and pencil and whiteboards and put it inside of SAP. And so we had to basically, and this is a change management dimension, that we had to really focus on changing behaviors as well. And so that was a real big part of it. And so part of our change management initiative was to introduce our user audience, our stakeholders, to how we would actually use the ERP system to manually, or I shouldn't say manually, but to automatically replace our manufacturing planning functions. And it was a big deal. It was it's a culture shock, because we're not going to do things the way we used to. And it's like that airplane cockpit example I showed, and the transition from going from all those dials and controls in the cockpit to the way they fly airplanes now with autopilots and screens, and the computer does a lot of the work. And that's what we were doing. We were putting autopilot in for our manufacturing processes, so to say. So the training and support, very, very important role that you'll have. Continuous improvement, really, we mean from the monitoring the performance of the ERP, recommending enhancements for it, aligning the system with evolving business goals. And I mentioned one example where we went from bring the product in, ship it out from our warehouse, to where the products were being direct shipped. We were blindly going about it and having the vendor take responsibility for shipping it out to the customer. So again, you need different systems support for doing that. Typical responsibility, finishing up with data migration, validation. I can't emphasize enough the work that has to be done to prepare your data to move into the ERP system. Pre-selection, again, understanding and documenting existing business processes goes without saying. Defining the business-driven ERP software requirements that are based upon the transactions and workflows that you have, and demonstrating those. You obviously want to develop a business case for ERP. And a real important part of it is developing a business first, go live project strategy and timeline. And there's a lot of pieces to that. And by that, I mean, if you're a multi-plant, multi-country, multi-currency operation, your task is much more complicated. If you are a single entity operating out of a single location, you can put an ERP system in 90 days or less. But if you're a multi-site, multi-product, multi-currency, multi-business, the chances are you're putting it in within 90 days are pretty slim, because there's just too many moving pieces that have to be defined. And perhaps you'll have to have multiple, in that case, you may need to have multiple parallel implementation teams, so that you have one that may be implementing ERP for your business interest in the Americas and another for your European side of the house, for example. So again, very complicated. The bigger your business is, the more moving pieces there are, the more complicated the ERP implementation is going to be. I mentioned about the need to basically objectively evaluate and score candidate software. And the whole idea of that can be a can of worms, coming up with the evaluation criteria, scoring the candidates, finding candidate software that will fit your business needs. It's a whole process. And again, the larger your business, the more complicated it's going to be, because you've got more stakeholders involved. that you have to satisfy. Uh, Coordinating vendor demonstrations. Again, I've mentioned that already. Tabulating your software evaluations to come up with an overall best fit system. Again, 80% or better is a good number. I think anything below 80% is probably going to be cause for concern, and you're going to have a tough time getting that software implemented for your business. System setup steps, configuration and setup of the system to accomplish your business, testing of the software configuration, developing your master data standards, mapping your existing data from your systems into the ERP database, and conversion of existing business data into that database. Again, very, very important steps. Go live, training of the users, the change management support and go live readiness. Again, all things that are important, mapping of the data, conversion of the business data, moving work in process or open transactions into the ERP, the go live and ongoing support and troubleshooting of user issues, very, very important, especially in that first 48 hours. Developing and implementing post-implementation strategies that emphasize and optimize system utilization, very, very important. One of the things that I've been involved with in consulting is we would go into a business and we would spend a week doing a ERP effectiveness audit to determine, what's happening, what's good, what's bad, what are they using, what are they not using, what do they need help with, and it's amazing what having an outsider, a third set of eyes coming in and looking at it. And giving the company some advice on how to improve the effectiveness of their existing ERP system. So, host selection, all these tasks, and we've talked about a lot of them already. But again, getting that system up and running, very, very important. What happens next? Once you've got ERP is a big deal. And all of a sudden you got the ERP system up and running, and it's the first 48 hours is over. You have your party, and you throw your hands up in the air and you say, "What's next?" And it's the post-implementation support. In my mind, is the least glamorous role of ERP. Maybe because, it's ERP is kind of like a roller coaster ride. I'm not a big roller coaster fan, but when you get off the roller coaster, it's like, oh, that wasn't so bad after all. What's next? You go for another ride on the roller coaster. It's not. You really don't want to do that with ERP, but that's in effect. If you decide that you really like that pain and suffering, then after you get your ERP system up and running at your company, maybe they're going to do it in another part of the world, or maybe you decide to go in consulting and do that ERP implementation for other companies. So that's a couple of the things that you can do post startup. Is a lot of the ERP business analysts that I have known and worked with over the years have left in-house positions to go into consulting work. And so the only problem is, you'll make additional money, but you can expect heavy extended stay travel. And the type of work we do, you have to travel to the client. I know that a lot of people say, well, can't you do that remotely? And my answer is no. You really can't do it as effectively remotely as you can do it on site. And so remote opportunities do exist, but more so for the technical side of it and not so much for the functional side of it. Functional consultants, we're relationship builders. We need to build relations with stakeholders, intimate relations with them, to understand their processes thoroughly, and to understand what drives them, and so that we can get them to the next step with the ERP system. So If you stay with your company, you can expect that you're going to support that ERP implementation, and you're going to um, you know more training on the software. Um, you may take on more functional responsibilities in terms of support of the software. You started out in materials management. Now you're going to do materials management and sales and distribution, as an example. Um, and so uh, you'll leverage some of your existing knowledge and grow your database. Um, you really want your employer to put you through additional training, especially if your software vendor is introducing new releases. You want to keep up to date with them. And there's two ways that you can do that. You want your employer to sponsor you for user group participation and attending user conferences. So very, very important to get involved and be involved with your ERP system from that standpoint. So every BA always wants to know, well, how can I become an ERP BA? Well, the best and most complete training you'll get on ERP is through the official training that a vendor offers. So, in the way I've done it, um, I went to work for a company that at the time did not have a software package for part of their business, and 6 months later, they were, oh, we want to select software to run this part of our business. And by the way, we want you to coordinate that as your role as a systems analyst, the process of developing the requirements and analyzing the software available. Now, fortunately, I had done that before in another life in banking. I had actually looked at uh, requirements for a particular type of banking system. So I had some experience with that already. So uh, understanding the process made it a little bit easier. Uh, but once we went through the process of looking at a half a dozen vendors and selecting one, uh, and then we basically went off to training. Spent uh, probably somewhere between 2 and 4 weeks in training classes for the particular software that we purchased. And then I was and I actually was sitting in classes alongside some of our stakeholders, some of our end users. And so I was going to be their primary support. And so I had to be one step ahead of them in terms of training, because everything that they were learning the system could do for them, I had to learn how that was going to be set up and operationalized in the system. So very, very important. Um, Vendor sanctioned system integrators, big words. Basically, these are third parties. They are not the software vendor, but they are consultants, system integration houses, people like IBM or um, Accenture that have relationships with SAP, Oracle, and they provide implementation services for these software products for companies. So again, it's a matter of blending um, uh, their proprietary implementation tools and methodologies for software along with what the vendor is doing. So the value add there is they have the tools, the methodology, the wherewithal, the knowledge of implementing SAP or Oracle or whatever software it is at multiple different companies in multiple different business environments, and so you're paying for some of that. Um, you don't always get the best. The consultants that work directly for the manufacturers, they're sometimes very good and sometimes they're not. So we went through with both uh, uh, our software vendors uh, some issues in terms of the quality of the business analyst that they were throwing in front of us. Again, we had people on our implementation teams that had 10, 20 years of business experience. These stakeholders, they really weren't up for, you know, a kid fresh out of school that had a year maybe at the company, and they knew their software, but their business savvy just wasn't there. And so we actually spit up and chewed we chewed up and spit out a couple of consultants from our system integrator before we got the team right. So you may run into that a little bit. So some software vendors have partnerships with colleges, but the training is very basic, and oftentimes it's more technical in nature. How to use some of their technical tools to uh, migrate data, or to create external programs, or to set up the operating the technical environments that the software is going to operate under, or the user administration roles and responsibilities, security, that type of thing. So not always going to get a lot of support in terms of how to use the software, how to set up the software through that type of training. So again, I mentioned I spent about 10 days of initial training on the one software package. Uh, you can expect anywhere from 10 days to a month's worth of training for the implementation team role. And then once you're trained up on it, you're going to be the one that's going to be responsible for configuring the software and ultimately training and supporting end users of the software. So training, very significant and ongoing investment, because as the software updates and new releases come out, you're going to have to stay current with it. So very, very important. So I'm done. I probably spent way more time than I needed. Probably given you a lot more information than you expected. I'm not sure, but understand that your participation in an ERP project has potential for several outcomes. First of all, your deep ERP knowledge is going to make you more valuable and perhaps even indispensable to your current company. Understand that that means you may lock yourself into a given employer. You may lock yourself into a given software product, and you also lock yourself into a given role. So you might limit your earnings potential. So ERP can also be one of those, be careful what you wish for type of things. So you need to decide for yourself what's going to be the right outcome for you in terms of your ERP career. So I want to thank everybody for their attention today, and I'll be happy to hang out and answer any questions I can. A couple of quick things is I have posted on my website a couple of things that, this isn't, oh, well, anyhow, if you go to this Tradewinds Group Inc. website, you will find that I have out there a white paper on ERP that it's old, but it was written about 20 years ago. But the sequential process that I outlined today is pretty much covered in that white paper. Also, there's a second white paper on software requirements, and that explains a lot of the processes that I have used to gather requirements and use in terms of building process models that can be then adapted and used to complete the software configuration and training documents for the ERP system. Also, there's another set of documents called Business Operating System, and those illustrate some of the kinds of templates that I use in terms of building out the ERP system. I found it very important for me that when I go into a new system, into a new business environment, that so what does this department do? and I use spreadsheets a lot. You can tell I'm an accountant, right? But I like to know, okay, what do you do? What do you do monthly? What do you do weekly? What do you do daily? What do you do on an annual basis? We basically build an operating calendar of all the processes that you engage in. And then from there, we can detail out each one of those individual um, processes from the calendar. So that's my approach, if you will, uh, to how I like to build my knowledge of how the business operates so that I can transition it from the current day to the new environment in terms of the ERP. Do we have any questions?
Thanks so much, Bob. That was really insightful session. Just be mindful of people's time because we have gone over. I'm going to capture the list of questions and send them directly to you, Bob, and then the answers I'll send out to the attendees just so that we can, because I know it's quite late here in Ireland and people are probably want to get their dinner or whatnot. But that was really, really interesting. And thanks so much again for speaking on behalf of myself and the IIBA Ireland chapter. And thanks so much for everyone who sticked around and for attending. I'll get the slides as well off Bob and I'll share them along with the answers to the questions. But keep an eye on our LinkedIn page for the next day in the life of a BA. And yeah, enjoy your evening, enjoy your afternoon, morning, wherever you're joining from. And thanks so much, everyone, again.
I look forward to getting your questions and answering them and getting them back to you.
Brilliant. All right. Thanks, everyone. Bye bye.